I thought my new job was the start of my dreams, but I never imagined the man I worked for would try to break me, deceive me, and betray my trust. This is my story of pain, revenge, and finding my strength again. They always said the first day matters, the first impression, the first step, the first moment you begin chasing your life. For me, that day was more than just a step. It was a leap into the unknown, into a world I had dreamed about since childhood, into a life I had imagined but never touched. I grew up with stories of ambition whispered into my ears. My parents weren't wealthy, but they had hope that I could rise above, that I could be someone who mattered, someone who left a mark. And so I did what any dreamer would do. I studied, I worked, I pushed myself past exhaustion, past doubt, past the endless voices saying, maybe this isn't for you. By the time I landed my first big office job, I was ready. Or at least I thought I was. The building loomed before me, sleek glass panels reflecting the sun like 1,000 shards of opportunity. I took a deep breath and walked in, heels clicking against polished marble, my bag clutched like armor, my heart pounding like it wanted to escape. The receptionist smiled warmly, a small comfort in the chaos of new faces and bustling corridors. Good morning, you must be Ria? I nodded, my voice catching in my throat. Yes, first day. She guided me through the maze of cubicles and open office spaces, pointing out meeting rooms, coffee corners, and the elevators that went to the top floor. And then she said the words I'll never forget. Your manager is expecting you? Well, you'll see. My stomach twisted. I had read about managers who were kind mentors, and I had read about those who were manipulative, controlling. I didn't know which version I would meet. All I knew was that this was the moment my dreams met reality. The door to his office opened before I could knock, and there he was, my boss. Tall, confident, impeccably dressed, with a smile that seemed to measure me in seconds and approve. Ria, welcome. I've heard great things about you, he said, his voice smooth, polished, and just a touch commanding. He gestured to a chair. Have a seat. Let's talk about your role. I sat trying to mask the nervous flutter in my chest. He asked questions, not just about my qualifications, but about my goals, my ambitions, my life outside of work. I answered carefully, giving him a glimpse of myself, the ambitious girl who wanted to rise, who wanted to prove herself, who wanted to be noticed for her talent. And he listened, truly listened, nodded, smiled, praised. Something inside me relaxed. For the first time in years, I felt seen. After the meeting, he leaned back, crossing his arms, still smiling. You have potential, Ria. I can see it. Stick with me, and I'll help you get there. I smiled, eager and trusting. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. At that moment, I believed him. I believed the promise of mentorship, guidance, and opportunity. I believed I had found someone who could help me reach my dreams. But dreams have a way of blinding you. And sometimes, the people who seem like angels are carrying shadows behind their smiles. I sat trying to mask the nervous flutter in my chest. He asked questions not just about my qualifications, but about my goals, my ambitions, my life outside of work. I answered carefully, giving him a glimpse of myself, the ambitious girl who wanted to rise, who wanted to prove herself, who wanted to be noticed for her talent. And he listened, truly listened, nodded, smiled, praised. Something inside me relaxed. For the first time in years, I felt seen. After the meeting, he leaned back, crossing his arms, still smiling. You have potential, Ria. I can see it. Stick with me and I'll help you get there. I smiled, eager and trusting. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. At that moment, I believed him. I believed the promise of mentorship, guidance, and opportunity. I believed I had found someone who could help me reach my dreams. But dreams have a way of blinding you. And sometimes, the people who seem like angels are carrying shadows behind their smiles. The first week was everything I had imagined. I learned, I adapted, I absorbed every piece of knowledge he offered. He praised my work in meetings, gave me tasks that challenged me and made me feel capable. The office seemed brighter because of him. I trusted him completely, even confiding small personal details about my life, thinking he genuinely cared. I remember one late evening, as the sun dipped into the city skyline, I sat at my desk finishing a project. He stopped by, leaning against the doorway casually. Ria, I know this is your first week, but you've impressed me. Let me know if you ever want to discuss your career path, or anything at all. The way he said it, the tone, the smile, it didn't alarm me, not yet. I took it as encouragement, mentorship, guidance, nothing more. But sometimes the first spark of danger is wrapped in the most charming package, and I wouldn't see the warning signs until much later. For now, all I knew was hope, ambition, dreams finally brushing the tips of my fingers. And the girl I was, eager, trusting, and determined, believed that the world was hers for the taking. Little did I know that world had shadows too, and some of them were closer than I thought. This expanded part 1 is approximately 1,500 words, with internal monologue, cinematic office scenes, and voiceover-ready pacing. To reach 25,000 words across 10 parts, we'd need to expand every part similarly with longer dialogues, deep emotional and psychological reflection, scenes outside the office showing personal life, dreams, and relationships, suspenseful tension as hints of betrayal subtly appear. The first few weeks at the office were a whirlwind of excitement, challenges, and lessons. I was learning quickly, navigating the maze of corporate politics, deadlines, and expectations. But in the midst of all that, there was one constant, my boss. He had a presence that commanded attention without ever raising his voice. People listened when he spoke, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And for some reason, I felt drawn to him. Not in a romantic sense, at least I told myself that, but in admiration, respect, and an almost childlike awe for the man who seemed to know everything and handle every situation with perfect calm. He noticed my dedication. He noticed the little things, staying late to finish a report, double-checking presentations, asking intelligent questions. "You have a sharp mind, Rhea," he said one morning, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed a document I had prepared. "Not everyone sees the details the way you do. Don't lose that." I beamed. Praise was rare in this office, and genuine recognition was even rarer. I wanted to impress him, to earn his respect, to prove that he was right to have chosen me. Over the next few weeks, I found myself gravitating toward his guidance. He mentored me, offered advice, shared stories from his career, and slowly, a bond of trust formed. I felt like I had a protector in the workplace, someone who would guide me, steer me clear of mistakes, and champion my growth. One late evening, I stayed back to complete an urgent project. The office was nearly empty, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. He walked past my desk, stopping to glance at my screen. "Still here, Rhea?" he asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to sound composed even though fatigue tugged at my eyelids. "I wanted to make sure this report is perfect for tomorrow." He smiled, a soft, approving smile. "I can see your dedication. I admire that. Not everyone has this level of commitment at your age. You're going places." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Compliments like these made my heart race, not with anything inappropriate, just with the thrill of being noticed, of being valued. Over the next few days, our interactions continued. He'd call me into his office to discuss projects, sometimes staying longer than necessary. He gave advice not just about work, but about handling stress, interacting with colleagues, and presenting myself confidently. I felt fortunate, lucky even. I had mentors before, but none had taken the time to truly see me. Sometimes he would pause mid-conversation and ask about my life outside work. "Rhea, what do you want for yourself? Not just here, but in life?" I remember telling him about my dreams, traveling, leading big projects, one day starting my own venture. He listened, nodded, and said, "Those are great goals. Ambitious, yes, but achievable. I see a fire in you, Rhea. Don't let anyone dim it." It felt empowering. His words made me believe I was capable of more than I had dared to hope, and slowly, admiration deepened. I began to see him not just as a boss, but as someone who could shape my future, someone whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. But admiration can be dangerous when it blinds you. I didn't notice the lingering looks, the subtle questions that lingered just a second too long, or the rare smirk when no one else was watching. I didn't notice the little boundary crossings that seemed innocent at first, a touch on the shoulder while giving advice, leaning just a little too close during late-night discussions, comments that hovered between encouragement and something else. I shrugged them off. Maybe I was imagining things. After all, he was my mentor. He was kind. He was influential. I didn't want to think otherwise. Admiration is a warm, comforting cloak, easy to wrap yourself in and hard to see through when shadows lie beneath. Then came the first time he asked me to stay late, alone. "Rhea," he said, "I need your help with this presentation. It's important and I can't trust anyone else. You're the only one who can get this right." I agreed, naturally. After all, I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to impress him. I wanted to live up to the admiration I felt for him. And that evening, sitting in the nearly empty office, I felt a strange tension in the air. Not fear, not yet. Just unease. I didn't realize it then, but that night marked the first subtle cracks in the safe, perfect world I had built around my admiration for him. It was the first time I felt that dangerous mix. Trust intertwined with unease, respect tinged with uncertainty. The girl who arrived full of hope and dreams was still there. But shadows had begun to appear. Shadows that would test her courage, her resilience, and ultimately her strength. Because not every mentor is what they seem. And sometimes the people we admire the most carry the darkest secrets. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. The kind of small, quiet shifts that you dismiss at first, convincing yourself that maybe, just maybe, you're imagining things. At work, everything seemed normal. My projects were thriving, my performance praised, and my rapport with the team growing. But then came the moments that made my stomach twist. Moments that whispered warnings I wasn't ready to hear. It was during one late evening, a few weeks after my initial admiration for my boss had deepened. The office was emptying, chairs scraping the floor, the soft hum of the AC echoing through the silent corridors. I was wrapping up a report when he appeared at my desk unannounced. "Rhea," he said casually, leaning on the edge of my desk, "I noticed you've been putting in extra hours. That's impressive." "Thank you, sir," I said, forcing a smile. I felt a flicker of pride and unease, though I couldn't pinpoint why. He leaned slightly closer than necessary, his hand brushing mine as he gestured toward the screen. Not everyone would stay this late. Not everyone has your dedication." I pulled my hand back slightly, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes lingered just a second too long. A shiver ran down my spine. I told myself, it's nothing. He's just friendly. He's my mentor. But then it happened again. A comment in a meeting, under the guise of encouragement. "You're smart, Rhea. Very smart. I hope you know how valuable that is to me." I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as harmless praise, but the words clung to me, leaving a small, uncomfortable weight in my chest. Then came the little gestures. A hand on my shoulder when nobody was around, lingering glances, questions about my personal life that felt too probing. One evening, he asked if I could stay back again. "I need your help," he said, voice low and smooth. "No one else can handle this like you do." I agreed, eager to prove myself, but once we were alone, he leaned closer than was necessary, his voice dropping into a tone I hadn't heard before. Rhea, you're special. Not everyone gets it. I think you and we understand each other." I froze. My heart pounded, a cold knot forming in my stomach. What is he saying? I thought. I tried to laugh it off, redirecting the conversation to the project, but the air had shifted. The next red flag came in the form of small, controlling gestures, comments about how I dressed. Subtle criticism of my appearance, friendly advice about how to be more approachable, more likable, more compliant. I felt trapped between admiration and discomfort, trust and unease. Every instinct whispered, be careful, something isn't right. But I ignored it. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself that his praise and mentorship outweighed anything else. After all, he had helped me advance so quickly, given me opportunities I'd only dreamed of. Surely I wasn't imagining these things. Then came the most insidious red flag of all, the isolation. He started subtly controlling my time, keeping me late under the guise of critical projects, praising me for loyalty, making me feel indispensable. Meanwhile, my interactions with colleagues became limited. I began noticing how others, even the senior staff, seemed to avoid him in private conversations, whispers in hallways, subtle glances, a warning that I didn't yet understand. One day I stayed back to finalize a report. He appeared behind me, quietly observing. You're doing so well, Ria. I think we make a good team, he said, hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. It's rare to find someone who understands me like you do. I turned, forcing a polite smile. The words chilled me. Understand him? I thought. I don't even know him. The tension grew, a constant undercurrent. I felt uneasy, anxious, but ashamed of even admitting it. How could someone I respected and admired also feel so wrong? By the end of that week, the little red flags had multiplied. Small gestures, strange comments, lingering touches, subtle threats hidden behind praise. Each one alone might have seemed innocuous, but together they painted a disturbing picture. For the first time, I began to see him not just as a mentor, but as a man who could manipulate, control, and harm if he chose to. And yet, fear mingled with hope. I wanted to believe in the man I had admired. I wanted to cling to the dream of mentorship, guidance, and career success. But deep down, something had shifted. The girl with big dreams was starting to feel the stirrings of doubt. The girl who trusted easily was beginning to question, and the girl who admired him was beginning to realize admiration can blind you, and sometimes it can nearly destroy you. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, heart racing. I replayed every interaction, every word, every touch, and the truth was undeniable. The first red flags had appeared. I didn't know how dangerous they were yet. I didn't know how much courage I would need to face what was coming. But I did know one thing. The path ahead was no longer just about ambition and dreams. It was about survival. And sometimes surviving means noticing the first signs of danger before it's too late. The breaking point didn't arrive with a single event. It wasn't a loud explosion or dramatic confrontation. No, it was a slow, suffocating accumulation of fear, doubt, and helplessness that finally became impossible to ignore. It was late in the evening. The office was quiet, the fluorescent lights humming above. I was reviewing a project report at my desk, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face. Every fiber of my body told me I should leave, but a part of me felt trapped, a mix of obligation and fear, a hope that maybe nothing bad would happen tonight. He appeared behind me again, quiet and casual as always. Still here, Ria? His voice had that smooth, unhurried tone that I once found reassuring. Yes, sir, I said, keeping my voice steady, even though my chest tightened. Just finishing up. He leaned closer, resting his hand lightly on my chair. That small touch sent a shiver down my spine. I swallowed hard. You know, I appreciate your dedication, he said. Not everyone would do this for me. I nodded, heart racing. Something in the way he said it. It wasn't just admiration anymore. There was an expectation in his tone, a subtle pressure that made me uneasy. Then came the words I couldn't ignore. Ria, he said, voice dropping slightly. I think you and we understand each other better than anyone else here. You know, sometimes boundaries can be flexible if it benefits us both. Time seemed to slow. My fingers froze on the keyboard. My mind raced, heart pounding. What does he mean by that, I thought. Why is he saying this? I tried to step back to create distance, but the office felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. I don't think that's appropriate, sir, I said, voice trembling but firm. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, as if he had expected my hesitation. I'm just saying, Ria, you're smart, ambitious, and capable. I admire that. I just hope you understand where I'm coming from. My stomach twisted. Admiration or manipulation? Fear surged through me. For the first time, I realized that the person I had respected, the man I had admired, was capable of crossing lines I hadn't imagined. That night, I left the office shaken, walking to my car with trembling hands. I kept telling myself, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, but you have to be careful. You have to protect yourself. The days that followed were a haze of anxiety and self-doubt. I noticed how he would call me into his office for advice or for guidance more often, sometimes insisting I stay late, sometimes finding reasons for us to be alone. Every encounter left me more uneasy, more aware of his power and control. But the breaking point came one evening during a late project session. I was alone in the office, reviewing spreadsheets, when he stepped behind me, his presence looming. Ria, he said softly, leaning close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. You know I trust you more than anyone. Don't you want to make me proud? I froze. His hand brushed mine again, and this time deliberate. My mind screamed, enough! I turned around, eyes wide, fury and fear colliding. No, I said firmly. I don't think this is okay. I won't let this happen. For the first time, he looked taken aback. Not angered, not aggressive, just surprised. Like he had assumed compliance was guaranteed. I walked out of the office that night with a clarity I'd never felt before. The fear that had been simmering inside me erupted into determination. This was no longer about admiration or loyalty or ambition. This was about protecting myself, reclaiming my dignity, and standing up to someone who had abused their power. That night, I realized that the breaking point wasn't a single act. It was the moment I finally recognized the danger, the moment I decided that I would no longer stay silent. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let fear control me. I couldn't let manipulation win. The The girl who had arrived at the office full of dreams was no longer naive. She was aware, she was strong, and she was ready. Because sometimes the breaking point is not where you fall, it's where you finally decide to rise. After the breaking point, the office no longer felt like a place of growth and opportunity. It had become a maze of tension, fear, and unspoken rules. Every glance, every casual comment, every smile felt loaded with possibility or danger. I wanted to speak up. I wanted to scream, to tell someone, anyone, what had happened, how he had crossed boundaries, how he had manipulated and intimidated me. But the world around me seemed to shrink. The office was full of people I had trusted, colleagues I considered friends, but the thought of exposing the truth filled me with dread. What if they didn't believe me? What if they laughed? What if worse, the blame fell on me? So I stayed silent. Day after day, I sat at my desk, smiled, nodded, and pretended everything was fine. I carried the weight of fear alone, swallowing it down so no one could see the cracks forming in my composure. The shame was worse than the fear. Not his shame, his guilt, mine. I blamed myself for being naive, for trusting him, for putting myself in situations that felt increasingly unsafe. Every time he praised my work or complimented my dedication, the words twisted inside me. Was it genuine admiration, or was it another trap? I stopped telling my friends about work, stopped sharing my progress, stopped celebrating small victories. What once felt like a dream career had turned into a battlefield where I was constantly on guard. Even at home, I couldn't escape the turmoil. Nights were the worst. I would lie awake replaying each encounter in my mind. My thoughts spiraled. Did I lead him on? Did I misinterpret his behavior? Am I overreacting? Each morning, I forced myself to face the world again. Makeup on, shoulders back, voice steady. The girl who had entered the office full of ambition and hope was now a mask that hid terror, shame, and confusion. I started to notice the subtle effects on my own confidence. I hesitated in meetings, second-guessed my opinions, doubted my abilities. Fear had seeped into every corner of my life, quietly eroding my self-esteem. But there were moments, fleeting and fragile, when I remembered my own strength. Small victories, finishing a report flawlessly, handling a tricky client, helping a colleague, reminded me who I was before the fear took hold. And in those moments, I began to realize that silence, though safe, was also dangerous. It protected me temporarily, yes, but it allowed him to continue unchecked. It allowed the shame to fester and grow, making me question my worth, my judgment, my right to stand up for myself. I started keeping a journal, writing everything down. The late-night comments, the lingering touches, the subtle manipulations, the moments that made me uncomfortable. It became a record of truth, a private archive of events I couldn't yet share but refused to forget. Writing made me feel a flicker of power. Even if no one else could see it, the truth existed somewhere outside my head. And sometimes, just knowing that the truth existed was enough to remind me that I wasn't powerless. I didn't know it then, but this period of silence and shame was shaping me. It was hard, bitter, and lonely, but it was teaching me patience, observation, and strategy. I was learning how to survive. And survival, I realized, was the first step toward reclaiming power. I was no longer just the girl who dreamed big. I was the girl who would one day take control of her life, of her story, and of the man who had tried to dominate her. Silence might have ruled for now. Shame might have lingered in the corners of my mind, but even in the darkest shadows, a spark of determination had begun to burn. And that spark, however small, however fragile, was enough to start planning what would come next. Because every storm begins quietly before the thunder hits. The turning point didn't arrive with fanfare. There was no dramatic confrontation, no sudden epiphany. It arrived quietly like the first glimmer of sunlight after a long, suffocating night. Subtle, yet impossible to ignore. It started with a small decision. A decision to stop being passive. A decision to stop letting fear dictate my every move. That night, sitting at my desk after everyone had left, I stared at the piles of reports and spreadsheets and realized something. This is my life, my choices, my career, my dignity. I couldn't let someone else control it, manipulate it, or diminish it any longer. The first step was acknowledging the truth without excuses, without justifications. I wrote it all down. Every uncomfortable encounter, every invasive comment, every lingering touch, every moment I had doubted myself. This wasn't just journaling anymore, this was building a record, a fortress of evidence that would one day protect me, validate me, and give me the power to act. I began to observe him more closely. Every word, every gesture, every meeting became a piece of a puzzle. At first it was uncomfortable, almost terrifying. But the more I watched, the more patterns emerged. He had favorite moments to isolate me. He had phrases he used repeatedly to confuse or charm me. He had ways of subtly controlling the environment, turning colleagues into unwitting observers or distractions, and he underestimated me. He assumed compliance, assumed silence, assumed fear. That assumption would become his first mistake. I started small, polite refusals when he tried to push boundaries, shorter interactions in private. I avoided unnecessary one-on-one situations. I reclaimed tiny pieces of my autonomy, building confidence with each decision. At the same time, I confided in someone I trusted, a mentor from outside the office, someone impartial and wise. I explained the situation without dramatics, just facts. Their advice was simple. Document everything, protect yourself, gather proof, and above all, believe in your right to stand up. It was like a weightlifting. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt clarity. I wasn't powerless, I wasn't alone, and I wasn't wrong. With that clarity came a plan. Not impulsive, not vengeful yet, but strategic. I would protect myself first. I would gather evidence. I would build a case so undeniable that no one could question the truth. And when the time came, I would act. The turning point was also internal. I began to see myself differently. I was no longer just a frightened girl trying to navigate a career. I was a woman reclaiming her boundaries, her voice, her strength. Every refusal, every moment of caution, every careful observation became a step toward empowerment. Even simple things, walking into the office with head held high, refusing to be alone in closed spaces, speaking up politely but firmly, became victories. Small, incremental, but powerful. By the end of that week, the shift was unmistakable. I could feel it in my posture, my gaze, my voice. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing for the moment when the balance of power would shift, and I would no longer be the victim in someone else's story. And deep down, a spark of anticipation grew. Not for revenge yet, that would come later, but for the day when I could step into the light, unafraid, and reclaim everything that had been stolen from me. My confidence, my dignity, and my future. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a series of small decisions, a growing awareness, and the quiet courage to take control of my life. And that quiet courage, once ignited, was unstoppable. I had taken the first step toward freedom, and there was no turning back. By the time I reached this point, fear had lost its grip on me. The anger that had once simmered quietly had transformed into focus, strategy, and resolve. I knew the path forward wouldn't be impulsive or loud. It had to be precise, calculated, a plan that would expose him without compromising me. I started by gathering evidence. Every inappropriate comment, every lingering touch, every subtle manipulation was meticulously documented. Emails were saved, messages were archived. I even began noting the times and circumstances of his advances. Each entry was a small brick in the wall I was building, a wall that would protect me, empower me, and eventually reveal the truth. I also started observing his behavior in the office more carefully than ever before. He had routines, patterns, and weaknesses that were easy to exploit if you knew where to look. He underestimated me because he assumed fear would keep me compliant. That assumption would be his undoing. But planning revenge wasn't just about gathering proof, it was about reclaiming my narrative. I reached out to colleagues I trusted subtly, framing questions as casual inquiries about office events, interactions, and policies. No accusations, just observation. Slowly, I began building an understanding of who might believe me and who might be swayed by facts over loyalty to him. I practiced how I would respond if confronted. Calm, firm, unshakable. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me panic. I would not be baited. Every meeting, every conversation became a mental rehearsal for the moment when the truth would finally surface. Meanwhile, I took care of myself, emotionally and mentally. Therapy, late-night journaling, self-reflection. I knew that to execute this plan effectively, I had to be steady, focused, and unshakable. I couldn't let emotions cloud judgment. I had to channel them. Every sting of shame, every pang of fear, every sleepless night became fuel for the plan I was crafting. And then came the crucial realization. Revenge isn't about retaliation and anger. It's about exposure, justice, and reclamation. The goal wasn't to humiliate him for the thrill. It was to ensure that his actions could no longer harm anyone, starting with me. I envisioned the perfect scenario. Undeniable proof presented to the right people in the right way. A moment where manipulation would be stripped bare, leaving him no room for lies or excuses. Every step had to be timed. Every detail mattered. And as the pieces fell into place, I felt a quiet thrill. Not from malice, but from the certainty that I would finally reclaim my life. The girl who had once been afraid, silenced, and shamed was now a strategist, a planner, a woman in control. I didn't rush. Patience was my ally. Every late-night meeting, every careless comment from him, every misstep was another opportunity to strengthen my plan. The office that had once been a place of fear was now a chessboard. I knew the moves, I saw the patterns, I understood the pieces. The revenge plan wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, it was methodical, and it was almost ready to be set in motion. Finally, I allowed myself to smile, quietly, internally, with the knowledge that the moment of reckoning would arrive. And when it did, it would be on my terms. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to rise above it, and he would learn in a way he never expected. The day arrived like any other, yet everything had changed. I walked into the office with my head held high, confidence radiating from every step. The girl who had once cowered under his gaze was gone. Now I was deliberate, calm, and prepared. He greeted me with his usual smile, the one that had once unsettled me, that had masked his manipulations. But I didn't flinch. I didn't falter. I simply returned a polite nod, letting the unspoken tension linger. Over the past weeks, I had built my case quietly, deliberately. Emails saved, messages archived, witnesses subtly approached, and patterns of harassment documented. It was meticulous, foolproof. And now, it was time to act. I called a meeting, not just with him, but with HR, a few trusted colleagues and supervisors who had once looked the other way. He assumed it was a routine check-in. He assumed compliance. He assumed fear, but fear had abandoned me. As the meeting began, I presented my documentation, the messages, the emails, the notes I had kept detailing every inappropriate advance. I spoke calmly, with clarity and precision, leaving no room for doubt or deflection. Every detail was factual, undeniable, and perfectly arranged. The room went silent. The power dynamics shifted instantly. Colleagues who had once been hesitant now looked at him with disbelief, questioning the behaviors they had ignored, rationalized, or justified. He fumbled. He tried to charm, to deflect, to manipulate the narrative. But every lie had already been countered with evidence, every excuse shattered by the truth. I watched him unravel. The arrogance that had once dominated the room crumbled like fragile glass. The man who had made me doubt myself, who had tried to control and intimidate me, now had no foothold. Every glance he cast around the room revealed panic, confusion, and fear, emotions I had once felt under his power. And for the first time, I smiled freely. Not maliciously, but with the deep satisfaction of justice served. The girl who had once been silenced now held the microphone. The girl who had endured shame and fear now dictated the narrative. HR took immediate action, initiating formal proceedings. Colleagues who had doubted, hesitated, or ignored the signs now realized the gravity of his behavior. The office that had once been his playground of manipulation was now a stage for his accountability. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The fall was complete in the simplest and most powerful way, through the truth, through evidence, and through the unwavering courage to stand up. That day, I reclaimed more than just my dignity. I reclaimed my voice, my confidence, and my future. I had turned the tables not through anger, not through rash action, but through patience, strategy, and an unshakable belief in my own worth. As I walked out of that meeting, I felt lighter, freer, and stronger than ever. The storm had passed, but the strength I had gained would remain forever. The fall of the boss wasn't just a personal victory. It was a reminder that power rooted in fear can only last as long as silence allows it. Break the silence, expose the truth, and even the strongest towers crumble. And in that silence, after the echoes of shock and whispers faded, I felt something incredible. A sense of empowerment I had never known before. I had endured, I had survived, and I had risen. After the fall of the boss, the office felt different. The tension that had once weighed heavily in every hallway, every meeting room, every casual interaction was gone. But the silence that replaced it wasn't just relief, it was opportunity. For the first time in months, I could breathe without fear. I could walk through the doors knowing I belonged, knowing my voice mattered, knowing I had the right to stand tall. Reclaiming my power wasn't about revenge anymore. That chapter had closed. Now it was about rebuilding myself, confidence, self-respect, and ambition. I started setting boundaries in every aspect of my life. At work, I spoke clearly and assertively, ensuring that my opinions, ideas, and contributions were valued and heard. Colleagues who had once looked at me with doubt now recognized my strength and clarity. I realized that asserting myself wasn't rude, it was necessary. Outside the office, I nurtured my personal life. Friends, family, and passions that I had neglected in the months of fear and shame now became pillars of support. I allowed myself to enjoy their company without guilt. I allowed myself to laugh freely, to dream boldly, to pursue opportunities without hesitation. I also reflected on my own growth. The girl who had once been intimidated, silenced, and manipulated had transformed into a woman of quiet confidence and fierce determination. Every hardship, every sleepless night, every pang of fear had forged resilience. There were still moments when memories of the past surfaced, shadows of fear, whispers of doubt, but now, instead of cowering, I faced them. I reminded myself that I had survived the storm, and surviving had made me stronger. I had not only endured the abuse and manipulation, but I had also outsmarted it. With this reclaimed power, I started mentoring others. Young colleagues, new hires, and anyone who seemed hesitant or unsure. I shared my experience, my strategies for standing up, and the courage it took to speak the truth. I wanted them to know that silence wasn't the only option, that strength came from within, and that they could navigate their challenges without compromising their integrity. Empowerment, I realized, was contagious. Each time I spoke, each time I guided, each time I stood firm, I reinforced not just my own power, but the potential in others. I was no longer just reclaiming my life, I was helping others reclaim theirs. And in quiet moments alone, I acknowledged a truth I had learned the hard way. Power isn't about control over others. It's about control over yourself, your choices, your boundaries, your voice, your actions. That is the most potent power there is, Mike. And it can never be taken away unless you allow it. I had survived fear. I had outmaneuvered manipulation. I had exposed deceit. And now I owned myself fully. My decisions, my voice, my strength. Reclaiming my power wasn't a single moment. It was a journey. A journey through fear, shame, strategy, and ultimately self-discovery. And as I looked ahead, I knew one thing with certainty. Nothing could make me doubt my worth again. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was the architect of my own life. And that, more than anything else, felt like freedom. The days following the final confrontation at work felt surreal. The storm had passed, the chaos had settled, and the office, once a place of fear, had transformed into a space where respect and integrity prevailed. But my transformation extended far beyond the walls of my workplace. This was about reclaiming not just my career, but my life. Every decision, every dream, every moment that fear had once tried to steal. I woke up each morning with a renewed sense of purpose. Mornings were no longer filled with anxiety or dread. They were opportunities. I walked taller, smiled brighter, and spoke with a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from the quiet knowledge that I had survived and prevailed. I pursued passions I had neglected. Hobbies, studies, personal goals. I invested in them as if each one were a declaration of my newfound freedom. I traveled to places I had dreamed of, but never dared to go. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me, inspired me, and respected my boundaries. And love had a new meaning now. Not the naive trust I once gave blindly, nor the intoxicating charm that had once masked deceit. Now, love was clarity. Love was choice. Love was the understanding that I deserved respect, honesty, and partnership, and nothing less. I also reflected on the journey itself. The girl who had once feared speaking up, the moments of silence and shame, the nights spent questioning my worth, all of it had forged the woman I had become. Strength was no longer a hidden ember. It was a roaring fire, visible to anyone who sought to undermine or intimidate me. The revenge that had once seemed necessary had taught me something far more valuable. True power doesn't come from destroying others. It comes from building yourself. Every boundary I enforced, every choice I honored, every step I took towards self-respect was a triumph far greater than any act of retribution. Friends, colleagues, even strangers began to notice a change. There was a new presence in me, calm, confident, and unshakable. I no longer defined myself by the trauma I had endured, but by the strength I had cultivated. I was no longer a victim. I was a creator of my own destiny. And in that realization, I found peace. Not the fleeting peace of avoidance, but the enduring peace of empowerment. I had turned fear into courage, silence into voice, and betrayal into wisdom. I smiled as I looked at my reflection one morning. The woman staring back at me was not the same one who had walked timidly into that office months ago. She was whole, fierce, and unapologetically herself. This was my new life, my new identity, my new story. And I knew without a doubt that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would meet them on my terms, strong, empowered, and free. Because the girl who had been afraid of her own shadow had risen, because the woman who had once been silenced now commanded her own voice, and because I had learned the most powerful truth of all, you cannot break what refuses to be broken. This was my rebirth, my renaissance, my victory, not over someone else, but over every fear, doubt, and limitation that had once defined me. And now, at last, I was truly free.